You'd never heard The Library Dragon? This is a great story, The Library Dragon by Carmen Agradidi, and this is the perfect story for the librarian to read. Sunrise Elementary School had a big problem. The new librarian, Miss Latah Scales, was a real dragon. Miss Latah Scales was hired to guard the library, and she took her job seriously. Hundreds of new, clean books replaced the old, smudged ones. These shining gems neatly lined the shelves of her library in perfect order. Number 398.2 in the 500s, absolutely not, and no fiction among the biographies. She kept a fiery eye out to make sure no one removed any books from the shelves. Her motto was, "A place for everything, and that's where it stays." The very thought of little sticky children fingers touching and clutching and pawing and clawing and smearing and tearing her precious books just made her hot under the collar. Miss Scales thought that the way some of the books spread an unfounded fear of dragons was positively inflammatory. Books that depict cruelty to dragons should never have been published in the first place, she said. She got so fired up about this, she just discarded the books she didn't like. Not only did she discard them, she incinerated them. That means she burned them up, probably with her dragon breath. The kids watched in awe. "Well, that settles it," whispered Albert Hoops. "Where there's smoke, there's fire, and that Miss Scales is a real dragon, all right." So then there's a PTA meeting. It says topic, dragons throughout history, the myth, the mystery, and the speaker is Sir Wyatt Knight. Not surprisingly, the kids at Sunrise Elementary School began to dread Library Day. It wasn't long before the teachers stopped sending their children to the library. They kept coming back singed. You know what that means, singed? Like slightly burned. They'd go to the library and the library dragon, I guess, got so mad at them, she slightly singed them. First, the principal tried to reason with Miss Scales, but his plan backfired. Instead of cooling her down, he just fanned the flames. And finally, "Don't forget who does the hiring, Miss Scales," sputtered the principal. "Oh, really?" she said. "And who does the firing?" asked Miss Scales with a glare and a flare that caught his tie on fire. "Now cut that out," said the principal as he waved the smoke out of his face. "No smoking in the library," Miss Latah Scales said dryly. The principal fumed. The teachers were incensed. Worst of all, the children had missed reading and story time for weeks, and their grades were going up in smoke. So the teachers formed a delegation, and after a trip to the cafeteria kitchen to fortify themselves, they paid a visit to Miss Scales. Miss Latah Scales smoldered as she listened to sweet Miss Lemon, the kindergarten teacher. "And most importantly, Miss Scales, dear, the children miss story time." "Story time, schmory time," blew Miss Latah Scales. "Why, if I let the children touch these big books with their gooey fingers and their dirty noses, the library wouldn't last a week." She stared so furiously at the teachers that they threw down their weapons and clanged out, all except for sweet Miss Lemon. "You know, Miss Scales, we all love the books as much as you do, but the library belongs to the children." "Good night, Miss Lemon. You slay me," cracked Miss Scales. "Why, the idea of story time is simply medieval." So now they're having an emergency PTA meeting. Look, she's chasing Miss Lemon out with her fiery breath. That Miss Lemon is a real spitfire, chuckled Miss Scales. But she had spewed so much smoke and fire that sweet Miss Lemon had to lie down for a nap. She was really dragging. In fact, she was burned out. Being a library dragon can be a lonely job, Miss Scales mumbled to herself as she heaved a mighty sigh and closed her scaly lids. It was at that very moment that Molly Brickmire accidentally wandered into the library. Molly was on a quest. She had lost her glasses and couldn't see a thing without them, unless it was right under her nose. She stumbled into a bookshelf, and a book fell onto her lap. She never even saw the sign that said, "Do not touch. The books are for display only." It was way up over her head. So she held this one right under her nose and began to read. First, a class of second graders in line for water at the water fountain heard her and tiptoed in to listen. Then fourth graders outside playing kickball heard a story and they crowded around the windows. "Speak up," someone said. Molly Brickmire spoke up. Word of story time in the library spread like wildfire at Sunshine Elementary. Slowly, Miss Latah Scales rose up from behind the bookshelf and looked at the boys and girls huddled around Molly. She'd never seen anything quite like it. The children looked like they belonged there. "I love you, Snuff," Molly read on as the children listened. "Give me that book, Molly Brickmire," roared Miss Scales. Molly held the book cheerfully toward the scaly blur. Miss Latah Scales took the book and eyed it suspiciously as it hung from her claw. First she sniffed it, then she checked the spine for cracks. Then she checked each page for stains and smudges. Finally, Miss Scales looked around at the children and cleared the smoke from her throat. Now, where were we?" "Why, yes, I love you, Snuff," said Miss Scales as she began to read. At first, the children were too nervous to listen. But when Molly Brickmire climbed up on Miss Latah Scales' lap and didn't get scorched, they all relaxed. "You're warm," whispered Molly. "Shh, don't interrupt," Miss Scales cracked. Everyone was listening so intently that they almost missed it. As she read, Miss Latah Scales' scales began to fall onto the linoleum floor with a clickety-clack, 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 until she was left as Miss Lottie, librarian and storyteller, sitting on a mountain of yellow, green, and purple scales with Molly Brickmire, dragon slayer extraordinaire, on her lap. The rest of the children warmed up to Miss Lottie right away. The changes in Miss Lottie's new kid-friendly library were hard to miss. Not surprisingly, the kids at Sunrise Elementary School began to love Library Day. Miss Lottie's transformation, however, was not complete. "She's got some rules over here. Mind your library manners. Treat a book like you treat a friend. And you don't wipe your nose on a friend. Remember to check hurt books into our book hospital. Return books when they're due so others can enjoy them. This is a library, not a bookstore. If you need help, ask. That's why I get paid the big bucks. Quiet, please. Whisper in the library, yell on the playground. And happy reading, pumpkins." Her transformation was not quite complete because every librarian needs a little bit of a dragon, or else who would guard the books? Hey, that's an AR book. It's a 4.8 so for even some of you girls that are in the older grades, you can probably take a test on that if you never have. Okay? Now you know the librarian wouldn't stop with just the library dragon. I also brought the library mouse. This one's by Daniel Kirk. And this is kind of what goes on in the library after dark. Sam was a library mouse. His home was in a little hole in the wall behind the children's reference books. And he thought that life was very good indeed. Every day when the library was full of people walking up and down the aisles, studying, checking out books, and working on the computers, Sam was curled up in his little hole, sound asleep. Every night when the people went home and the room was dark and quiet, the library belonged to Sam. And every night Sam read, and he read, and he read. Sam read picture books and chapter books. He read biographies and poetry and cookbooks and sports books and fairy tales and ghost stories and mysteries by the dozen. Sam's mind was filled with facts and information and images of faraway places, and his imagination brimmed over with wonder and fantasy. She can come on through if she wants to. One night, Sam decided that it was time he would write a book of his own. Sam folded over some little squares of paper he took from the librarian's desk to make the pages. Then he found a pencil that had rolled underneath the shelf and began to write. Write what you know. Sam had read a book about writing and it said, write what you know. So Sam wrote about being a mouse. He drew the pictures for his book by posing in his little mirror and then sketching what he saw. Sam worked very, very hard, and finally his first book was done. He called it Squeak, A Mouse's Life. And he wrote on the cover words and pictures by Sam. He went to the biography and autobiography section of the library, and he tucked his first book onto the shelf. Then he went back to his little hole in the wall and waited. The next afternoon, sunlight streamed in through the library windows. "What's this?" asked a girl whose teacher had sent her to the library to do a book report. "I've never seen anything like this before," said the librarian, and she put Squeak, A Mouse's Life on her desk. Later, she showed it to the other librarians. Sam decided to write another book. It was called The Lonely Cheese. And he worked on this book until it made him feel hungry. It was a good thing that he always found so many crumbs to eat by the trash basket in the hallway. When he had finished the illustrations, Sam scurried to the picture book section and proudly placed his latest book on the shelf. Then he went back to his little hole in the wall and waited. The next morning, sunlight streamed in through the library windows. "What's this?" asked a little boy who was looking for a big book about trucks. "It's another book by Sam," said the librarian. "Just who is this Sam?" she thought to herself, and she put The Lonely Cheese on her desk. Later, she showed it to the children at story time. Sam decided to write a chapter book. It was called The Mystery of Mouse Mansion, and it gave Sam goosebumps when he wrote down the scary parts. The full moon was shining down through the windows of the darkened library when Sam crept over to the mystery section and sneakily placed his book on the shelf. Then he went back to his little hole in the wall and waited. I bet you can predict what's going to happen. The next day, sunlight streamed in through the library windows. "What's this?" asked a teenager who was looking for a good creepy book to read before bed. "We have got to find out who this Sam is," said the librarian. "I'll leave a note on the bulletin board and tell him that we would like to meet our new author. She put The Mystery of Mouse Mansion on her desk, and later she showed it to the writing class that came in after school. That night, Sam found the note. The note says, "Dear Sam, all of us at the library have been enjoying your books immensely. We are all wondering who this mysterious Sam really is. Whoever you are, you certainly have a lot of talent. Not everyone has it in them to write even a single book, let alone 3. We think it would be fun to have a Meet the Author Day with you as our special guest. The children would love to hear you read your books and share some of your secrets for writing. Yours truly, Mrs. Forrester, Head Librarian." Sam felt very nervous. He was happy that the children at the library liked his books. He was flattered that they wanted to meet him. But mice, as a rule, are very shy when it comes to meeting people. Sam could not understand why people thought that writing and making up stories was so hard. If only they would try, they might find out that writing was really lots of fun. Sam had an idea. He went to the librarian's desk and got some supplies. All night long, he wrote and drew and snipped and folded and stapled his little rectangles of paper into mouse-sized books. In the morning, when the librarian opened up the children's room, there was a sheet of paper taped to the door. It said, "Meet the author today." A little girl was the first to see Sam's display, all set up on the front table. "What's this?" she asked. There sat a tissue box with a pair of pencils taped to the sides and a banner stretched across the top, and on the banner was written, "Meet the Author," with an arrow pointing down. The girl bent over to look into the empty tissue box. "Oh," she said in surprise, for there in the bottom of the box lay Sam's little mirror, and in the mirror the little girl saw her own face smiling up at her. "Me?" she said, "an author? No way!" Next to the mirror was a stack of tiny blank books and a pile of pencils that Sam had sharpened with his little teeth. All that day and for many more thereafter, people came to the little display to meet the author. Soon there was a whole shelf full of books written and illustrated by people who had never written a book before, telling stories that had never been told. Sam was a library mouse. His home was in a little hole in the wall behind the children's reference books. All that night, Sam sat in his hole, thinking and thinking about the next book he would write. Would it be a mystery, an adventure, a funny book, a true story? There were so many stories to tell. "Aha!" he thought. "I'll just have to write one of each." So Sam picked up his pencil and got to work. Did you like that? That was good. 2 library stories, one about a secret author, the library mouse, and one about a librarian that wasn't very nice in the beginning, was she?
She didn't let you pick out a book.
That's terrible. That's what libraries are for. Boys and girls are supposed to be able to come into the library and touch all the books and look through all the books and decide which ones they want to check out, and she wasn't even letting them look at them, was she? But she got over that in the end. She lost her old dragon scales and she decided she'd be nice. And she opened that library up like it was supposed to be. Have y'all picked out some books you're going to get? Awesome. Very good.